Hello and welcome to the next edition of This. Capitalism. What is capitalism? Should we oppose it, and what would that mean? Does it mean the market economy, buying and selling using cash? The price is determined by supply and demand of individual buyers and sellers. Or does it mean a concentration of wealth and resources in the hands of large businesses? Big corporations have monopoly/oligopoly power, buyer's market, vis-à-vis consumers or distributors, etc. They can charge higher prices than they would get in a truly competitive market. Big corporations have monopoly power, seller's market. In the labour market, workers have to accept jobs pretty much on the terms of employers and so settle for lower wages and worse conditions than they deserve or than they would get in a truly competitive labour market. Does it mean big banks and financial institutions rule the roost? A wealthy elite own, control and run the big banks, including the major high street banks and also the less familiar but even more influential investment banks, which are the commanding heights of the economy because they own vast swathes of share and bond capital of the major corporations which control the production of goods and services and the employment of the masses. The Marxist language says that the bosses own the means of production. Therefore, the bosses are able to take the lion's share of wealth generated through the combination of the means of production, capital, i.e. machinery, land, etc., and labour. Labour is divided among millions or billions of individuals, and these individuals are not united but remain divided and atomised. Capital, on the other hand, is owned in the concentrated hands of a few, who compete to a certain extent but also collude. Because labour is far more divided and unorganised than capital, the owners of capital have far greater bargaining power than the owners of labour. Therefore, those who own the means of production get to keep the lion's share of the wealth generated. Workers try to get organised and form trade unions which extend their solidarity to each other and set up political parties such as the Labour Party back in the day to represent ordinary people's interests vis-à-vis those who own the means of production. But the bosses fight back. They fund political parties such as the Conservatives who represent their interests, as well as right-wing think tanks such as the Adam Smith Institute, and thus launch attacks on institutions such as trade unions. Witness the hamstringing of the unions at the hands of the Thatcher government, for example. They also co-opt working class institutions, or at least the leadership of these organisations, such as the Labour Party, and turn them into business-friendly versions, witness the birth of New Labour. As a class, the business elite have got the media stitched up to reflect the world back to the workers through a business-friendly lens. Thus, the media functions as a propaganda organ for the owners of the means of production, keeping people right-wing and divided. It's not a conspiracy theory. There are elements of conspiracy, for sure. The elite do talk to each other and they don't go out of their way to tell the public what they're saying to each other. But for the most part, the emergence of a corporate-friendly media is the evolution of a symbiotic relationship which emerges quite naturally without the need for any overarching secret plot nonsense. Now, some people would prefer not to believe all this, but where do those people's loyalties lie? Another key feature of capitalism is that although the proponents of capitalism say that capitalism means a free and democratic society, big corporations are, internally, more like a dictatorship. Inside a business corporation, there is a hierarchical, pyramid-shaped chain of command from the top down to the bottom. Rank-and-file workers have to do what they are told, and there is very little scope for them to democratically influence the way the company is run. Through trade unions, they try to get more say and have some limited success. In Germany, they have a greater level of success where unions are represented on the board of directors, and this leads to a perhaps better, though that's not to say perfect by any stretch, form of capitalism, with both less industrial conflict that costs workers and bosses considerable time, money and resources in the UK and other countries, and better conditions and pay for workers, and probably a more efficiently run enterprise too. Nonetheless, even there, it's doubtful that the workers really receive the full fruits of their labour, but clearly they have made some gains that haven't been made so much in the UK. What would it mean to oppose capitalism? Are we talking about getting rid of markets? Or maybe just reining them in? Complementing them with other ways of working together? Are we talking about getting rid of big corporations, or cutting them down to size? Making them more democratic and less hierarchical? Are we talking about getting rid of banks and investment banks? Are we talking about getting rid of cash? What would we use instead? What's the alternative to capitalism? Socialism? Socialism, what does this mean? The workers collectively own the means of production? How? One way is that, at least at first, the state owns the means of production on behalf of the workers. That is, the means of production are held in trust for the people by government. So is socialism A, the people control the state, or B, the state control the people? True socialism is A, but it seems that the attempt to set up A can become corrupted into B. Then you get a totalitarian dictatorship, which is completely undesirable. And you get state capitalism, which means that the workers are still exploited by the owners of the means of production, except that this time the owners of the means of production is one single giant corporation called government. Democratizing the corporation. Perhaps this is the way forward. In which case the corporation should be run by the workers rather than by the bosses. How to do this? One way is to make it completely non-hierarchical and use consensus decision making. One way is to have managers but in an inverted hierarchy, and their job being servant leadership. The manager of a department is then an elected delegate of the workers in the department. Their job is to help coordinate the activities of that department, both internally and interdepartmentally. These delegates are recallable by the workers if the workers don't like the way they are exercising their leadership. The manager is thus a servant of their staff rather than their master. The department managers then elect someone to facilitate coordination between them and to represent them to the next level up, and so on up to the top manager, whose job is to serve everybody in the whole company. And what about the customer? Well, the whole company knows that they need to produce products that the customer will want, so this should always be taken into account by staff and managers at all levels. As well as democratising the workplace like this, we can democratise government like this too, make it into a bottom-up rather than a top-down structure. Also, there needs to be far more autonomy at all levels from the levels above them. Let people use their initiative rather than micromanaging them. So the main point here, this is a bottom-up rather than top-down model of how things could be. That's not quite socialism yet, though, because are the corporations still going to compete in a market? Well, maybe they should. Or maybe something else. And how about this? Workers' councils. This was the original model of the Russian Revolution before the revolution was co-opted by authoritarians. The workers in a particular area and or industry would have democratic institutions in which they decide what to produce based on consumer demand and their own skills and so forth. They would decide how to run their workplaces, how to coordinate with other industries to get the inputs they needed, and how to get the outputs to people who needed them. And they do all this democratically. Presumably, you'd also have consumers' councils where the people, who are the same people as the workers but in a different capacity, decide what they need for their lives. Do they need more motorbikes or more knives and forks, more shoes or more jackets? Society would be run through a negotiation between workers' councils and consumers' councils, or something like this. It's all totally democratic, and it's done collectively through discussion and thoughtful deliberation rather than as atomised individuals, buying and selling. Some people say that the market economy is democratic, but it's not, because it's $1, one vote. That means the rich have more of a voice than the poor. And often, the cause of being rich is that your parents were rich, so were able to give you a head start in life. Anarchism, what about anarchism? Autonomous individuals cooperating harmoniously and voluntarily in empowered communities. No hierarchy, no chain of command, no leaders, consensus decision making. But what would the detailed picture be? And how would we get there? Localization. We keep another alternative to capitalism. We keep markets, but we make them far more localized. Economic activity should be at the most local level appropriate. Paracon, participatory economics. This is a set of ideas put together by the anarchist economist Michael Albert. It combines elements of socialism and anarchism, which are arguably the same thing in the long run, but are pretty different in the short run. In the short run, socialists want to capture the state, but in the long run, it's supposed to wither away. But anyway, regardless, let's continue. Workers and consumers' councils. The workplace is run democratically. Above all, there is the balanced job complex. Everyone does a balance of routine and decision-making work. A balance of boring and creative, empowering work. So you don't get a coordinator class in society who have developed high levels of communication skills, etc., which allow them to establish themselves as a privileged class. This balanced job complex is crucial in Paracon to the establishment of a truly classless society. Conclusion: it's still not entirely clear what we mean by the word capitalism. It doesn't seem to be clearly or uniquely defined. Radical change in some form seems to be a great idea. I'm still not sure on the question of markets. Do we rein them in and regulate far more radically? Do we abolish them? It's a serious question. People who say that, markets are oppressive, I want to know, how far do you go if you don't want markets? How far do you go in terms of getting rid of them? Because can I swap something? If I have this and you have that, can we swap? Is someone going to come along and tell us, no, you're not allowed to exchange, there is to be no exchange? That doesn't seem right somehow. So if we were going to get rid of markets, how far will we go with that? That's that question. Do we transform them into something else? Do we complement them with radical new institutions and ways of doing things? Okay. We can stop here.